guest, Ryan Garry, who has had a really great playing career and also now currently coaches at the Arsenal FC under 23, so which is a fantastic achievement. Ryan, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Dean. How are you?
Yeah, what's the weather like in England at the moment?
It's very nice. It's pleasant at the moment. We've had 2 sunny days, which is fantastic.
Great.
Unfortunately, we potentially have a bit of rain tomorrow, which is typical over here in England for the weather.
Great. Well, we had plenty in Chicago recently, so we feel your anxiety. Going to crack on and kind of get on with your presentation, which I'm really, really excited about. Currently, in the current climate we're in with the virus and everything that's going on with that, what's kind of been your process with keeping, the players technically efficient and obviously fit? And, what's been the process around Arsenal and your procedure there?
Yeah, so, very similar to everyone across the globe at the moment. First off, I'd like to start by saying I hope everyone on the webinar is healthy and safe, friends, loved ones. It certainly, put things into perspective. We've first off, we've had to make sure that, every staff member and every, member of the academy is safe first and foremost. And then we've remotely tried to, have an individual program for all of the players, Dean. It's been a long process. We've had to, the use of technology has been really, really important for us. And we've tried to do as much as we can do from a distance, if that makes sense. So we've, each area of practitioner has had, direct contact with the players. From a technical perspective, we've tried to set the guys some challenges around, a certain amount of touches a day, a program where each day there's a sort of a specific focus, whether that be first touch or whether that be turning or running with the ball. And obviously there needs to be a context for the environment that, everyone's in. So I'm sure very similar to, any major city around the world. We've got some guys that have got, access to space, whether that be in a local park or garden, and there'll be some guys that are maybe in an apartment. So it's really varied, but essentially doing what we can within the constraints.
And could you provide us with an example where if you had a striker or a forward, because specifically at this age now, the kind of players are now kind of singling down to maybe one or two maximum positions now. So is there a specific session that you would, ultimately set a striker, which difference to a centre-back or a full-back, right-back, anything like that?
Yeah, so there are some examples and we've had to be fairly flexible. So for instance, for an example, if we've got a front player or a striker and the area that they've got available would allow them to maybe, shoot at an area, maybe a mini goal, or they're fortunate enough to have a big space and maybe they've got the ability to, a family member to be a server. That's great. And then, we've had some guys that have had, real good areas to work in. And then we've had some guys that haven't, and we've had to go, a bit more intricate with regards to space. And then we're simply just looking at what they can do within that area. And it's more or less using a ball on the wall, for instance, which again, it has a different return. And we've just tried to maximize the learning within, that individual player's environment.
Yeah, it's great. All right, so I know you've got a presentation, so keen to kind of jump on that. So if you want to start, it's brilliant.
Okay, so what I've got here is really an agenda, and the topics within the agenda cover, my own progression through an academy as a player, my perspective on that and my reflections certainly, and then I'll share how I got into my current role as a coach at Arsenal, and my journey into that position, and also just I suppose really from this current period where you are away from the day-to-day environments, just some reflections on, what I see as the pressures on young players over here in Europe. And then, some examples on what we're doing within the lockdown at the moment over in London.
It's fantastic.
So I found myself, it's been really good putting this presentation together because it's taken me back to, my earliest memories of football. And certainly, even before getting into football, I found, myself, I was playing different sports or multi-sports. So I can remember going to the local swimming baths with my granddad, learning to swim. He would sometimes take me to, just play tennis with him. And there wasn't necessarily one main sport that I played up until, and I can vividly remember trying judo and liking that until someone pinned me on the floor. And then I was like, right, that's not for me. And then I also went to some trampolining classes. And then it was fortunate for me that there was an advert in the paper for a local Sunday league team. And that was really my first interaction with football. I don't remember playing it in the school playground. And certainly it was the game had me hooked from that first training session. It was probably, for me, the right environment. So I think that environment was one where, it was all about fun. It was all about, social enjoyment. And it was, I suppose, really, it was that feeling of being part of a team. So that was really my first interaction with football. I found myself, kicking a ball in the garden. I was an only child, so really ball and wall was my real form of keeping myself busy in the garden. I can remember spending hours with a sort of an old floater ball, an old plastic ball up against a wall, and just trying to really, I think looking back, it was about trying to master the ball. I can vividly remember not being able to do kick-ups, and in a way, I must have seen someone do it, whether it was at the local park or maybe on TV, and just trying to think, right, I want to do that. And then I can remember sort of building up to, a bounce and then another kick up. And then that really was my earliest memory of the game. I put the no ball game signs up there because I'm sure, like any young child, you do sometimes wind your parents up. Fortunately, there wasn't any smashed windows, but there was a lot of, you need to take that outside. And I think that, that was my earliest recollection of, falling in love with the game. Yeah. So I spoke about that Sunday league team, and obviously, Dean, that's where me and you first met. And looking back, I think that I was really, really fortunate in the fact that that initial Sunday league team was of a high level. So the Echo League is a league in the East London, Essex region. And there's been, many, many players that have come out of the league. It was a really good level looking back. There was people like Jermaine Defoe who it would come up against, sometimes 4 times a season, Dean. I know you can remember. And, I think that Senrab team, everyone more or less found a club at the age of 13 and 14. And you've had people like John Terry, obviously the ex-England and Chelsea captain who've come out of that club. So I think looking back, that had a major impact on me actually making it, because I think that I was getting challenged every week, not only just in my training session with my team, but certainly with regards to the games program. Memories of Sunday league football was 2 things really. So they were cup finals at the end of the season and summer tournaments. Both have a lasting memory. So certainly getting to cup finals and losing or winning, getting that feel for, what the game's about with regards to playing in front of a small crowd, although at the time it seems massive. Enjoying those experiences and enjoying both the learning from losing and also the winning element, which I think is really, really important and would hold me in good stead. And then the summer tournaments where, I always felt there was always 2 teams and you would always, try your best. And again, there was success, there was failure, but there was always learning. And I think that's really important when you are a young player. trying to ultimately make it in the game. I think you need to take the learning moments when they come, and that sort of leads me on to the next stage. So I was just going back. So that Sunday League team, I was actually playing a year up. So I was a September birthday. In England, we work from the 1st of September to the 31st of August with regards to our registration. So I was an early birthday, but I think through luck again, that first Sunday League team was a year older, and I had done enough to stay, in that group. And again, I think that gave me an element of challenge. Although I was maybe quite a tall youngster, I think that it still was a challenge, and I think that held me in good stead. So as I got to the age of 7, through, I believe, the level of the Echo League, I was invited to go to Norwich, which obviously was like a wow moment with regards to them being a professional club. And I was invited to their Centre of Excellence, as it was at the time. Thoroughly enjoyed the training sessions, but unfortunately for me, that didn't last long because Norwich had to basically relocate that training centre further away from where I lived. And at the time, my mother wasn't able to get me to the training sessions. I think it was twice a week. We was living in East London. I think this Centre of Excellence, the training sessions were going to be in Colchester. So it was a case of mum saying, look, I know you're really enjoying it, but, you can't make it there. And I can remember being, quite disappointed, but, understanding that, it was a case of mum wasn't able to get me there. And, I went back into, carrying on playing for my Sunday League team. And yeah, it was one of those memories I look back and go, yeah, I was devastated, but I just got on with it. Fortunately enough, one of the players that me and Dean played with, a guy called John Spicer, was at Arsenal. And again, I think it was probably through John that I got the trial to go to Arsenal at the age of just before my 9th birthday. And, again, it was a mesmerising trial. Again, Norwich is a fantastic club, but Arsenal are one of the biggest clubs in the world. At that time, I can remember thinking, as I was driving into the training centre, thinking that, every pitch looked like Wembley, very different from Sunday League football. And, I was very fortunate to do well in the trial and, managed to stay there year on year after that. And I think that, certainly when I look back, one of the biggest things is that, I was fortunate because I think that I had good family support and there was no agenda. It was just purely about me enjoying it. That was the main consistent message from the get-go. So whether or not we had lost, whether we had won, whether I'd played well or whether I'd had a shocking game, that was never really spoken about. It was just go and enjoy it. There was no external pressure, which I think is important because ultimately, I was motivated through my own agenda. I was involved in football purely because I like playing the game. I think my mum said to me now, if you had said, what, I want to stop playing, she would have been fine with it. So I think that certainly now as a parent and as a coach, that's a really interesting reflection because you do see sometimes some parents that do put their children under pressure. So just with regards to progressing through the academy. So like I say, I got through the trial game, the trial period, I was signed, and I had a really interesting moment. It came during my first visit to Highbury, the Arsenal stadium. So I'd never been to a first team game in my life. I remember my scout at the time taking me to the game and I was blown away. So if you can imagine a 9-year-old Ryan walking through busy crowds in North London, excited because there was a buzz in the air. They was playing Manchester United when they had the likes of, Eric Cantona playing, a really good team. I'd seen these players on TV. I was going to see him in the flesh. And I can remember as we approached the stadium, the old entrance to Arsenal was like an old Art Deco sort of building. And I remember thinking, wow, this is some special place. And then you go into the main entrance, and then you see there the picture on the left-hand side of Herbert Chapman, who was the old Arsenal manager. And as a young boy, you see that, and it's quite a moment. You know, it pricks your consciousness, and you're like, wow, you know, who's this? What's that? It's quite an unforgiving statue. I went down the tunnel, and I had a moment where it's bizarre. I look back, and that was probably the moment that I thought, right, I'm going to play on that pitch. Vividly remember thinking I'll play on that pitch. And I remember, you know, just thinking I'm going to work as hard as I can to hopefully get on that pitch. And, you know, the innocence of youth is that you think you can get there. But I think that's a very telling story, because I do think that you do need to have a goal and a vision. And then it is about working towards that goal. And then, like I say, being associated with the club at that time, there's a picture there with me and Ian Wright. And, you know, that's the other side of, you know, the game, is that it can have an impact on so many different social causes. And I think that can't be lost, you know, in amongst the glitz of the glamour of the current game. These players that you see are heroes, and they do have a positive effect on the youth, whether they're involved in the game or not. So certainly as I was going through the academy, the thing that came through every training session, every game, was the high standards. So I've put there adapt or die. And the reason why I've put adapt or die is because with every age group, you know, there'll be people that come in on trial. You know, there'll be people that maybe leave the academy system. And it is almost like an adapt or die situation. And you do have to be aware of that. And I think that it was just the level of player at Arsenal, Dean, that really made me realise, you know, the standards, you know, the training sessions in the JVC Centre, which was at the behind the South Bank goal at the stadium, were just electric. You know, an old sports hall, however many kids in there, and, you know, the level was extremely high. And every time I went there, I knew that I had to bring my best game. I had to be ready. It was going to be intense. And I do think that best with best drives up the level. So whether I liked it or not, I knew that I was going to be challenged, and I knew that I would have to adapt. That was my mindset going into every training session. With that, there was a slight position change. So, you know, playing Sunday League football, I was a left winger. I used to think I was John Barnes. I wasn't as good as John Barnes, clearly, as it turned out. And then I sort of changed my position throughout my time in the academy. So I probably played in every position on that journey, but the main position would have been left back or centre back. And that ended up being my position as a professional. And it was at this moment as well, I think, that as I was getting to my teenage years, I realised that there was going to have to be a choice to be made around my social choices. So, you know, friends at school would be able to do what they wanted on the weekend. Whereas, you know, I think that there would be a district game potentially on the weekend, maybe a school game on the Saturday afternoon after the district game, and then maybe a Sunday league game as well. So, you know, it wasn't uncommon for there to be 3 games sometimes on the weekend, which, looking back now, I don't know if that is the case.
I'm just gonna getting loads of good information, right? I mean, we've got a number of coaches that are listening now. The change of positions. Obviously, I remember playing with you in the same team. You was one of the best left wingers ever, but somehow you ended back up, surprisingly to me, as a centre back. What was that process, and how did Arsenal or yourself discover that you was better adapted to the centre back role rather than the left midfield?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Dean. I think you know, I can't say it was one specific moment. What I do know is that you know, being a left winger and looking now as a coach, I think there isn't, especially when you're playing a small-sided game, I don't think there's much of a difference between being a left back and a left winger, dependent on, you know, where the ball is and where your location is on the pitch. I do think that being left-footed, coaches do naturally seem to want balance in their team, and therefore they will look at you and go, oh, well, he can maybe play there, which can be a positive. So you get, maybe more access to different positions. I think that, look, ultimately, as it probably got further up the pyramid, I call it, where, I say there's going to be extreme talent coming in.
Yeah.
I probably found my position very similar to, Ashley Cole. I know Ashley Cole was a left winger and he ended up at left back. I do think that if you're not good enough to be a winger, you can end up being a fullback. And that's not to say, that's not any disrespect to the fullback position, but there is a career route, I believe, for someone to migrate from being a winger to a more defensive wing back or fullback, depending on the terminology. So that's maybe why there was a positional shift. And, I didn't mind the defensive element of the game. I think I took to it fairly natural, and I just got on with it, Dean. That's sort of, that's my interpretation.
And I never suspected you of playing centre back. I always see you as a left midfielder. Again, for coaches that are listening in now that maybe are that kind of that mindset where they play players in one position or two positions, especially at the younger ages, what would be your kind of advice or reflection on that now that you've been through that process at the highest level, going from left midfield to centre back?
I've got to say, Dean, with my my reflections presenting this, and also now with my coach's hat on, I would say in the foundation phase, which over here is, under 9s to under 12s or under 11s, give the players game time and training time in all parts of the pitch, all three lines. Even goalkeepers that you think you've got, try them out on pitch. You might have an outfield player that ends up in goal. Because I just think that by giving young players different pitches and problems to solve, you'll get some surprises. You really will. And, exposure to different pitches, I think, is key as a youngster.
It's really interesting you say that, because the other concept of how I look at it now as a coach is, if I naturally have a forward player that I think long term, you think that, a forward position is going to be their kind of position, I tend to put them at the back. And the reason I do that is because if they get to understand how a centre back works or a defender works, especially when they go and play back in their original position in their forward, they're kind of been exposed to that concept of, well, I've played in that position. I know kind of what the centre back, what they see and what they feel. And is that kind of how you also view the kind of changing the positions?
Yeah, definitely. Because, even now we'll do it where, sometimes we'll say to one of our players in the academy now, okay, so if you're a central striker, put your defender hat on. What runs, what movements can you do that doesn't like? And they think about, and I'll go, go and have a conversation with a defender. Have a conversation where you're sharing learning, because I think that, you can pick up an awful lot by asking a teammate a question, for sure. No different than being a staff member, asking one of the practitioners, in a different area of expertise, okay, what do you think about this and why? So I think there's a real, you can learn, young players can learn off each other by asking questions and experiencing different positions, for sure.
Great. Sorry to
just
disturb
one
you.
quick. No, I just had a quick follow up. Have you noticed that it goes the opposite? So, for example, a left back could end up being a left winger. Have you ever seen that happen? It seemed like that's why I went in as a fullback when I came over here into college, and I ended up playing more forward. So, can it reverse the other way? I don't know, from your experience.
I think it can reverse both ways. Looking back, certainly, I think there's been more wingers that have dropped back into a fullback position, but I'm still thinking there's been players that have gone from the fullback position up, into the attacking unit. So I think it, going back to what I said, I think dependent on the the picture that you've got on the pitch at any given time, you can have fullbacks that look like wingers that can look like fullbacks, and with the evolution of the game, certainly over here with Guardiola, you've got fullbacks now that are central midfield players. So, you know, I think that there's a real multifunctional element to development now moving forwards for sure.
Sure. That's great. Thanks.
Yeah, carry on. Yeah.
So I got to the age of about 13, and I suppose really this was the first period where things got a bit more serious. So Arsenal at the time, quite a forward-thinking academy, they decided that they was going to do something that hadn't been done by an academy, where they was going to take 10 boys from my age group and they was going to put them into a school in London. They was going to pay the school a fee each year to house us and educate us. And essentially, that was when I was 13. And I was in a position where, you know, I had to have a fairly vivid conversation with my mum. So she said, look, I know you're serious about football. You know, I can see the effort and the time that you're putting in, but, you know, this is what Arsenal want to do. Now, I want to support you with your aspirations of being a football player, but you need to make sure that you don't neglect education. So, you know, the deal was that my mum would allow me to go to the football school, if you want to call it that, as long as my grades didn't drop. And I think that, you know, that was great guidance. So there wasn't any pressure to go, but there was an understanding that, you know, my school grades couldn't drop, behavior couldn't drop. And if it did, she was going to pull me out straight away. But also at the same time, you know, I can remember feeling, and that's why I put the medals there about, you know, first, second and third place, because there were some players that didn't get in because they wasn't in that 10. And this is really, I think, where the learning is. So in the year below me, there was a player called Justin Howarth. Now, Justin went on to play, I think, probably, you know, 50 plus games for Arsenal's first team. Then went and moved to Middlesbrough for, I think it was about £4 million. Justin didn't actually get into that initial first 10. So, you know, it's very interesting. When you are looking at development, there isn't a definitive, you know, this player's going to make it, that player won't make it. And that's really challenging, I think, if you are in a decision-making role. But that period of time was, it opened my eyes really with regards to life skills. So there was lots of ups and downs. So as good as it was to be training, you know, 4 times a week and have a school program that would allow me to do education with additional training sessions, there was elements of, you know, we became like a band of brothers. So there was times where we would have there was a crew of boys in the school, and it felt like every break time they wanted to have a fight. You know, there was elements of challenge around the social element, which, you know, I look back now as a parent, and I'm not saying it was ideal, but it did make me grow up, and it did make me realize that, you know, not everything's easy. You have to work towards things on and off the pitch, but, you know, good times nonetheless. Yeah. I was lucky. So I left school. So I left school at 16, and Arsenal offered me a 1-year scholarship contract with a 3-year professional contract bolted on. There was 4 of us of the 10 that were offered that. And there was, I think it was about 12 boys in total. So again, going back to that elite environment, it was challenging because obviously there were some boys that had done, you know, that journey with me that maybe only got scholarships. I think that what that did do, that move into full-time football, it really opened my eyes up, to the industry demands, which are massive. So at this time, and I've called it their best with best. So we as a you know, an academy, I think we won 2 FA Youth Cups. We won the national title under 17 and under 19 level. So every day in training was hard, you know, going up against some people that will go on to score Premier League goals, you know. So it wasn't a case of it was a hard game coming up against West Ham or Chelsea or Spurs on a weekend. Every day was hard. And I do think that again, you know, that accelerated my development and certainly set me on my way with regards to being, you know, good enough to play for the first team. That debut came at the age of 19 in a League Cup game against Sunderland. And again, this is an interesting one. Okay, so I came on for Robert Perez, who at the time started the game and played as a left winger. But the manager at the time, Arsene Wenger, who I'm sure you all know, he didn't tell me where I was going on when I was going to go on. So I can remember warming up, getting the call to get ready to go on, put my shirt on, spoke to the assistant manager, spoke to Arsene Wenger. And then it was only when Robert Perez came off the pitch that I then realised that I was actually going to make my debut for Arsenal in front of 38,000 in a left wing role that I hadn't played for, you know, a few years. And, you know, looking back now, you never see that where a sub just gets sent on and you just work out where you're playing. But, you know, I can remember it going very, very quickly, thoroughly enjoyed it. And it was only afterwards going home in the car that I remembered the vision with the tunnel. And I realized that I had done it, which is, you know, that was, you know, a very interesting moment where I think at the age of 19, I'd had that first experience really of working towards something, you know, that dream goal, and then actually achieving it and thinking, okay, so in life, if you do work towards something, for sure you need a lot of luck, you need a lot of help. And there was a huge support network behind the scenes, but you can work your way towards your North Star. So unfortunately for me, that debut I spoke to you about there, that came during a season where I then made my full league debut against Southampton. That came towards the end of the season, and unfortunately, that was the beginning of the end, really, because I was unfortunate to pick up a series of quite serious injuries with my shins, which actually led to me missing the best part of 2.5 years. I had multiple stress fractures in my shins, which didn't heal. I ended up having to have a tibial nailing done in both shins, which kept me out for a long time. And there was just issues on return. So I say it was the beginning of the end because it certainly was challenging within that 2.5 year period to get back into what I call, you know, Premier League shape. I managed in my last year of my contract to get back on the bench for a game at Goodison Park against Everton. And then, unfortunately, in my last year of my contract, I broke my leg in a training ground accident. No one's fault. I went to block the ball and the ball sort of caught my ankle and I had a spiral fracture around one of the nails that I originally had put in to heal the stress fractures. So a bizarre chain of events, but essentially that was the end of my time at Arsenal. But during that period of 2.5 years out, you know, I was very fortunate to have access to watch the first team obviously train and play games. And, you know, at that time, they was probably one of the better teams in Europe at the time. So there was a lot of learning.
Ryan, I know you don't like to admit it, but you was actually part of the Invincibles. And for people that are listening, the Invincibles were the Arsenal team throughout the 2003-2004 season that went unbeaten in the EPL, which is an absolute phenomenal achievement. And you was actually part of that squad. So you was training and playing with like Thierry Henry, Dennis Bergkamp, Robert Perez, some fantastic soccer players. What was that like on a daily basis and being around that kind of clientele?
Yeah. So listen, it was fantastic for a young player who was, you know, in and around a very, very good squad, you know. So there was some really high level player that wasn't even starting games. So you can imagine, you know, as a youth team player going over and training with the first team was really tough. What's interesting was that I think it was my first training session. I remember going over there, doing the warm up, and then they would do like a series of like rondo boxes. So
Right.
Pat Rice, who was the assistant manager, basically put me in like this box of death. And I always remember two things. So this box had, I think you had Dennis Bergkamp was in it, Thierry was in it. You had who else was there? You had Kanu. It felt like it was the box of the best technical players. And as you can remember, as you can, imagine, I was in the middle for quite a lot of it. And I remember two things vividly coming out of that box. One, my neck felt like it had been broken just where the ball was whizzing because it was 5v2 one touch. And the second thing is, I remember thinking, right, the next time I'm over here, I'm not going to go in the middle of the box as many as I did today, because it was just, exposure to another level. But that was the two memories that I had. And, again, I think that's because you have to almost embrace the challenge. It's a very, it was a challenging environment in terms of the level. But if you've got dreams of playing on that pitch, you have to reach that level, and you have to, I go back to the adapt or die. That's what you have to do.
That's amazing advice. I mean, how do you create that, Ryan? I mean, we've got coaches, obviously, again, that listening in probably want to ask you a million questions. How do you create that in a session environment?
So I think it helps when you've got a fairly consistent level of player, and in terms of your session design as a coach, you've got to try and cater for everyone. And I think you have to try to, challenge players as much as you can. And challenges come in different forms. So, I think that you have to try and challenge someone in all four corners as much as you can in every session, essentially, which isn't easy. It's not easy to do that, but that would be my one bit of advice for sure.
That's great.
So then, I left Arsenal, and I was fortunate enough to be able to go to Bournemouth on trial. So Bournemouth at that time, they wasn't in the Premier League like they are now. They was in League One. I had a 6-week trial. I made my debut against Nottingham Forest at the City Ground. And obviously, because of everything that I'd been through with regards to injury, that's probably my proudest moment in the game, even after some promotions and whatnot, just due to the fact that, I'd managed to get back into a professional level game. And, I'm very, very grateful for Bournemouth for offering me that opportunity. Unfortunately, I then broke my leg for a second time after 10 games, I think it was. And as you can imagine, I was very low. I found that challenging because I think that I'd done so much to get back from the first leg break to then break it again was heartbreaking. But I managed to sort of pick myself up, or scrape myself up off of the floor, should I say. The season was more or less a write-off for me. I think I came back and ended up playing maybe 3 games towards the end of the season. We ended up getting relegated, and for those of you who know where Bournemouth is in England, so that's on the south coast, and Carlisle is almost up in Scotland. So it's the longest journey, or longest away trip you could go to then get relegated and then drive all the way back to Bournemouth. So it wasn't nice, but again, I put it down to an experience that life gives you, and you can learn a lot from it. And I think there's my element there as well, from going from a big club to a small club, was that there was financial difficulties as well. And that was really why we got relegated. So we incurred a 10-point deduction for financial issues, and that was actually what took us down. So there was a lot that went on in that first season at Bournemouth. The following season, we started on minus 17 because of, again, financial issues at the club. So we was up against it. We got to the Christmas stage. The manager was sacked, and that was probably that period of sort of 5 months was probably my hardest on and off the pitch. I had a few injury problems. I was away from friends and family in London, and I wasn't necessarily playing, and it was just very difficult. But again, I felt that, looking back, that period, I learned an awful lot about myself and understanding culture as well, because the following 6 months under Eddie Howe, who's obviously gone on to take the club to the heights of the Premier League. You know, the cultural element of coaching really came in, you know, the unity between the players. We had a small squad because of the financial issues. We couldn't sign anyone. We wasn't getting paid, but we managed to keep the club in the league. And I feel that, you know, certainly as a grown up now at the age of 36, there was real learning moments, although it was tough at the time. And then the following year, we was lucky to get promotion. You know, I felt that I had turned the corner with regards to fitness and form. I was performing, without sounding big-headed, I thought I was performing very well at a League One level. And at the end of that season, we got into the playoffs and lost to Huddersfield. But, you know, again, it goes to show in football, things can change very quickly. And unfortunately for me, it was during that great run in League One, I picked up an injury and then I had to retire from that. And that was, you know, a difficult one to swallow at the time because, you know, certainly looking back, I watched more games than I actually played. But, you know, reflections on my career. So there's different routes into the game. So at Bournemouth, you know, I found myself playing with people that have gone through a non-league system in the football pyramid in England, who then went on to play, you know, a high level in the Championship. So there isn't no right or wrong way of making it in the game. There's always going to be ups and downs. And I think that you just have to, you know, if I was to say now, what do I think helps a player? It's developing an all-rounded person, to be honest with you, because I think that, you know, people that play football, you know, we often speak about young players as players. Actually, they're young people, and as coaches, you've got to do everything you can to shape them to be able to deal with, you know, positives and negatives of life. You know, that would be my my sort of reflections on my career, really. So going into the coaching, I was interested in coaching. Probably because of the injuries, and I found myself watching my peer age group playing, you know, whether that was in the under or the reserves as it used to be then, or watching the first team. So looking back now, I was probably coaching in my head before I was actually a coach. I started my coaching journey in regards to my coach education while I was playing. And I would look for opportunities to coach when I could. So, you know, not often, but when there was a moment where I felt like I could help out, I would try and do that. So, you know, when I was at Bournemouth, I would try and help out in the centre of excellence. And I think it was really just me trying to see if I could coach or if I liked doing it. I didn't put myself under, you know, any sorts of pressure to do so. When I did find out that, you know, I was going to have to retire, it was a strange series of events. So what happened was that I was doing my coaching badges. Eddie left to go to Burnley. There was a manager who was in the team, Lee Bradbury, excellent guy, real good guy. He got the job, he got it full time. And then obviously when I had to make a decision to stop playing, he said to me, you know, look, what are you looking to do? Are you going to stay in Bournemouth? Are you going to go back to London? And I said, look, I don't know. I had two young children. My head was a bit all over the place, you know, realizing that you're not going to be able to play football anymore. And he said, well, look, what about coaching? And I said, yeah, you know, he was aware of my, you know, doing the coaching hours. And what I didn't realize was that it was going to be as a first team coach at a League One club. So that was my first opportunity. It was you know, a men's team playing or had played with some of these guys, and that turned into be my first role. So I took the first team coach and a reserve team manager, which, you know, is a fantastic opportunity and one that I'll be, you know, very grateful for. Because what I did realize was that I definitely did want to, you know, coach. That's for sure. Very intense, but it was one that I threw myself into doing it. I did some sessions with Wimborne Town at the same time, which was a local non-league club, because I just felt that, you know, I needed to amass as many hours as I could away from what I was doing at Bournemouth with a different group of players. And I think this, and again, this is why I've put this slide in of the what looks like a mini castle. So when I was doing my coaching badges, I decided to use two groups. One was a local community college, and one was that picture there is Camford School. So Camford School is a private school, and very different type student to the local community college. What I found fascinating and what interested me more about coaching was the fact that it made me realize that you have to cater for what you've got in front of you as a coach. So that it's no good sort of thinking, this is what I'm going to do. You've actually got to think, okay, who's in this session with regards to level, ability, and also, you know, quickly finding out why they're there. So as you can imagine, the students at Camford, you could tell them something once and they would follow the instruction. Whereas, you know, the students at the local college were challenging. But it was a good challenge because it made me actually realize what is the essence of, you know, coaching, educating and helping people improve. So certainly you have to put in hours with regards to developing your craft. And then also as well, you know, again, going back to that first team environment, that's a winning environment. Whereas anything with regards to youth, you're developing for ultimately someone's first team. So there's a big, there's a difference within the context. And I think that, you know, my observations on that early part of my coaching career was that it was about ultimately, you know, communicating with everyone, having positive relationships and observing. You know, don't always feel that you have to go in and, you know, give a load of detail, because sometimes you just have to let them go and work it out for themselves and, you know, give them a little bit of guidance along the way.
Brilliant.
So after Bournemouth, I was there for a season, thoroughly enjoyed my time there, realised fairly early on that coaching was for me, but I didn't necessarily know if that environment was going to help me, you know, improve as a coach. So I was lucky to get a full-time role at the Nike Academy. So that's a full-time program for players that have been released from professional clubs. 11-month program. It was based at Loughborough University, which is a fantastic sporting university over here in England. And our challenge as a program was to, you know, get these guys back into full-time employment, domestically or internationally. So we went all over Europe. We went to Sweden. We went to Belgium. We went to Spain. We played, you know, Barcelona. We played Manchester United. We played Grimsby Town and some non-league clubs here. And it was about, you know, helping players get back into full-time football. What it did do that year, it made me realise, you know, along the way, when you are dealing with young players, you know, how can you skillfully allow them to be young people and enjoy life, but also as well make them aware of opportunities? Because I would say for 70 to 80% of the guys that were in the program at this time, one thing that would always come out when you spoke to them, you know, individually, was that they didn't realize the opportunity they had at their club. So that's something that I've taken with me, you know, into my roles at Arsenal, is the fact that you've got to try and always make sure they understand the opportunity that's in front of them. And actually, it's up to them whether they stay there or not. You know, listen, it's going to be extremely challenging, but there's a great opportunity. And I think that's life. That's the motto for life. You know, make it what you can. You know, don't let anyone tell you what you can and can't do. You know, if you've got a dream, work towards it. So after that year at the Nike Academy, I went for a role at Arsenal. And I've been fortunate in the last 7 years. I've had various different roles in the academy. So I've worked, you know, with every age group at the club. I've been a foundation phase league coach. I've had an experience, fortunately, for 2 seasons in taking the under-19s in the Youth Champions League. And I did that role whilst working in the youth development and foundation phases. And that gave me a really broad understanding of the sort of the development cycle, if you like, you know, seeing what it was like at the top end, and also working with the under-9s. It was fantastic learning. And now I find myself as a coach with the under-23s. And just before Christmas, I was very fortunate. There was a change of manager, and I was asked to assist with first team training. So in that 7 years, I've managed to do training sessions and coach every age group at the club, including the first team. So quite a varied and diverse coaching roles. So just quickly, what I've done is here, I've put influences as a coach. So I've got sort of 3 areas, really. I think you've got people that influence you as coaches of yourself when you're a player. And this is these people here. So I believe that everyone on this first pillar of really, they help me understand what it would take to be a player for one reason or not. So Liam Brady, who's at the top there, Liam was the academy manager at Arsenal. Liam was a very clever man because he, under his stewardship, the club must have produced over 50 professionals at various different levels. So that element of adapt or die in the right way at the right time was present in every training session. Neil Banfield on the left. So Neil is currently a first team coach at QPR. I had Neil as an under sort of 15, 16 and as an under 18s coach. Great intensity to his work, a real determination to maximize everything within a session. And, certainly I think that understanding the industry demand for Arsene Wenger's training sessions, he was able to do that. Don Howe is there. So Don Howe was my under-19s coach at Arsenal and had gone to many World Cups with, the England national team. He had won the FA Cup at Arsenal as a coach, as a player, and had a huge amount of detail to what he did. Don had the ability to answer any question within 2 sentences, and then he would also give you every answer that you needed. It was fascinating. I've never met a coach with that ability. Obviously, Arsene Wenger and Pat Rice were the 2, first team coach and manager duo that I had. Again, very different, but Pat as a fullback taught me an awful lot. And Arsene Wenger, I'll always be thankful because he was the person that chucked me on for Robert Perez, even though he didn't tell me where I was playing. He gave me that opportunity and, I'll always be thankful for that. And I think certainly, looking at what he done for the game in England and maybe even, with regards to the way that the game is played, there was people that would support other clubs, but they would love watching Arsenal because of his philosophy, his values of the game, which was, fantastic attacking football. So Roy Massey and Steve Leonard, who are underneath Arsene Wenger and Pat Rice. Roy Massey was the coach at Norwich for that first professional football club training session I had. And Steve was, a big part of my learning as a player. And I got the opportunity to then work with Steve for a few years before he retired as a coach. And it was really good to, ask him questions about my journey and his perspective of that. And then at the bottom now, I've got the 3 managers that I played under at Bournemouth. Very different characters, very good in their own way. And I think obviously Eddie Howe, who's in the middle, has gone on to, take the club to where they are now in the Premier League. And he's potentially an England coach for the future. As a influence as a coach, so the middle strand is, people who I've worked with or what I would say, I value their knowledge. So I worked with Jimmy on the left-hand side at the top at the Nike Academy. Jimmy's an FA tutor now. Jimmy's experience in the game as a coach, a developer of players is magnificent. Very similar to Steve Bold, who I work with now. So Steve's, played many games for the first team. Excuse me. He's done about 10 years in the academy. 8 years as Arsene Wenger's assistant, you know, so I'm really fortunate every day to be working with someone who's got a perspective of, you know, first team environment, youth environment. And, you know, I just pick his brains as often as possible. I'll probably do his head in at times, but we love talking about football. And I think that's ultimately, you know, where you learn. The people underneath Steve and Jimmy, you know, you've got John McDermott, who's just taken on a role as a technical director under, or a sort of an assistant technical director at the FA. He's done some magnificent work at Spurs. He actually invited me in on the early part of my coaching journey to see what they do at Spurs. And yeah, I was blown away by the level of work that goes on there. I know Arsenal and Spurs are rivals, but, you know, the fruits of his labour are coming out now with regards to the young players that are playing in Spurs' team and also up and down the league pyramid. Mikel is a manager now at Arsenal. It's really interesting. You know, he does have an influence on me because, you know, I'm working with, you know, alongside Steve, and we're looking to develop players to get into his team. So you have to know, what his expectancies are as a head coach. And, you know, it's really interesting to see, you know, some of his ideas, some of his philosophy that's obviously come from his own mind, but also working with someone like Pep Guardiola. You know, it's fascinating, and there's lots to learn, and all of those people on the screen have contributed to my learning. I also sometimes think that you have to look away from the game. So John Wooden is someone that, you know, I like because of what he stands for with regards to values, you know, teaching life. You've got Mobo back there who works for the ECB, England Cricket. So he's been in charge of their development program, and now he's actually, you know, one of the main men at the ECB. And a lot of their success has been, I believe, through his leadership and his vision. Simon Timpson, who is now an academy manager, I believe, at Man City, but has worked for the British Tennis Association. He's worked for the British Olympic Committee. So these are people that are working in high performance, but not necessarily in football. You know, I think there's a lot that you can learn from leadership in other sports. And then, you know, I don't know if anyone else is watching the Netflix series, but I found Phil Jackson's book about his philosophy on leadership really interesting. You know, managing what I call extreme talent, and, you know, how you can get buy-in from, you know, some great, not great, that does them a disservice, but, you know, elite level basketball players, how you can make them feel part of a team and develop them whilst developing others in a team, I think is fascinating. So yeah, this is our program in a nutshell. So Per Mertesacker, the academy manager, he's been academy manager since September 2018. He wants us to have the most challenging and caring football academy in the world. You know, his vision is, you know, us developing strong young gunners on and off the pitch. He's got, you know, values around respect, discipline, and humility, and the practitioners in the program. So if you imagine that we've got, very fortunate, we've got a lot of support that helps our goes around our football development program. And then as a coach, we will work with you know, those practitioners, and then we look at placing the player, you know, in the middle of the circle that's on the left hand side there. And there's 3 pillars that Per effectively is designed, which is around champion mentality, effective team players, most efficient movers, and people being lifelong learners. So that's sort of a one-pager on our setup. My current role as an under-23 coach is an interesting one. So our role essentially is to develop players for first-team football. Now, whether or not that's at Arsenal or whether that's in someone else's first team, who knows? But that's essentially what it is. We've got to try and challenge the players. And we've done that this year by a few things, really. So our average age of our squad has gone down. because we just looked at a few things. We needed to get our boys out on loan when we could. And also as well, you know, is there, and this is really for a question for everyone on the webinar, really, how much development is there going to be if you're only playing against someone who's the same age versus playing against someone who's older? So we've got to, you know, bring down that average age. Because we're on the same site as the first team, we work slightly differently, that we won't necessarily know what numbers we've got for sessions. So sometimes we could have, you know, 4 players, sometimes we might have 9 players, sometimes we might have 16. So it varies day to day. And so, you know, we often have to be adaptable as coaches, and that's just what comes with this role. And then often will be used for 11v11 purposes for the first team. So as you can imagine, when the under 23s go up against the first team, we're normally working on our defensive side of the game, which is, again, it's good learning. I think what my current role has allowed me to do is really reflect on seeing a cycle. And that's why I've put the pictures of these players along the bottom, because every one of these boys has got a story to tell. They weren't all superstars. Some of them were, some of them weren't. Some of them have left the club and gone to some big clubs and maybe not played as much as they would have liked. But I think that the guy on the left-hand side, he's a real interesting one, because Danny Ballard's been released twice. He got released at 14, he got released at 16, but yet we find ourselves as a club really intrigued by his ability to bounce back from a setback. And I think that ultimately that is maybe, you know, the most common characteristic that you need to have going into the future game as a young player, is about, you know, what can you do? What can you deal with on and off the pitch? Which leads me to the pressures on young players. So a snapshot of what I see as an under 23s coach is that there's a huge media judgment on young players. They can sometimes be judged and a narrative is put out there. So what do I mean by that? So I'll give you an example. Over in London, there's a lockdown. To keep fit, an Arsenal player maybe goes to the park on his own with no intention of, you know, socially being close to anyone. But because of their profile in their local park, someone asks for a selfie, then someone else comes across and asks for a selfie. And then the next thing you know, they're on the, you know, they're in the media as someone who's not respecting the social distancing, which isn't the case. But the narrative that's put out there to the public is so incorrect, you know, and I think we have to be aware of that. So, you know, we're dealing with young men in our squad, and, you know, the brain forms after they're, you know, around the age of 23 or older, but yet we're asking for them to be able to, you know, get on with so many different challenges, and we expect them to be perfect. I don't think they are. You know, the performance demands that are placed upon them, I liken it to, you know, in the UK, in England, we've got an education system. So when you leave school at 16, you do your GCSEs, but we're almost asking them to do something to a PhD level. You know, you can be an underage.
Oh, it's cut out.
Oh, might have lost him there. Hopefully we'll get him here in a second. We'll see if he comes back here. Hopefully he'll be able to get back. So if anybody has any questions or comments, I'll be happy. If you want to use this time before he comes back, hopefully can get back into the group here. But feel free to jot some down. All of the questions that you may have will actually keep on file. So hopefully we'll be able to do that. So I'm going to try and see if I can remove him there. Did you do that? So he might have just done that himself. So hopefully he'll come back here in a second. But if you have any questions, you know, feel free to pop that into the box real quickly, and we could be able to share that with him as we're moving forward. But, you know, a lot of really interesting information. I think I was jotting down so many questions as he was talking about his journey and and how things were going. So feel free to put anything down as we move forward as well. So hopefully he'll get back with us here pretty soon.
It's a really interesting concept about the different playing positions. I mean, as I say, with Ryan, I always knew him as a left midfielder and end up as a centre back. And do we pigeonhole at some of our kids too early?
Yeah.
I think that's definitely a key point that I've took.
Yeah.
I was gonna lean on him about the kind of individual player development at Arsenal, and also the kind of pros and cons around unopposed and opposed sessions.
Yeah.
He's actually trying to ring me. Hang on.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think he was going to get into that. I know Gary was asking a question: what does a typical session look like? So we'll make sure that we ask him that when he gets back in. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of how everything goes with it. I know when we was using that as an example, looks like he might be getting back on here in a second. There's players that can go both ways, in terms of the changing of position. I'll give a good example for those people who know a little bit about fullbacks and the centre backs become centre forwards. That happens a little bit. Some of you may have heard of David Weir. David Weir played for Everton, and he actually went to college here in America and ended up playing. I played against him in college, and he was a centre forward. Scored 4 goals against us. So, but he ended up making a massive living as a centre back, playing for Scotland, was the national team captain, as well as being a manager as well with some of the highly regarded teams. So it can happen both ways, and it's interesting to see the level of the players that he's worked with as well. It's just fantastic. I couldn't even imagine what it would be like. Here we go, coming back.
Hello, Ryan. How are you, mate?
Apologies.
You just paid the internet bill, have you?
The timing.
Go on, mate. We'll let you go on where you were about the social media. Really interesting points.
Okay, sorry. Let me just.
No, it's okay. We
get this back up.
We filled the void.
No problem. We were
Can
chatting.
You guys see that?
Yeah,
yes.
Great.
Yeah, sorry. So I don't know where I was before. Obviously, everything went down, but just around what can you control? I think the big thing that I would reflect on is the process. So it doesn't really matter what industry you're in or what level of football. Think about high challenge, high support. So if we want to be really, really challenging, then we're going to have to scaffold some support. And I think that focus on the process. So I look back and maybe that's something that I didn't do that well as a player, looking back now as a coach. But certainly, speaking to players now about just following a process. So if you do these things that you can control, you're maximizing what you can control. And then believe that will be, the best thing that you can do. And then really, lastly, just some examples of what we've been doing within lockdown. So we've challenged our players. We would do some individual work with the players before lockdown, where we had a thing called Playmaker, which is like a thing you can put on a boot, which it records how many touches you have on the ball. We was averaging through our individual work before training to hit 750 touches. So we said to the players, okay, look, in lockdown, can you get 750 a day as a target? And then we would then also look at a ball and wall challenge. We had like a skills challenge, which became like a social thing for the group. We also did a lot of analysis with the boys. So we built them up slowly but surely. So we was using Microsoft Teams as an organization. We was fortunate that we was able to extend that to the youth players at 18s and 23s level. So what we set about, once they was happy using the technology, we had like 4 weekly tasks. So it started off, feedback to us about a certain team in the Premier League in and out of possession. As part of their IDA development plans, we give them an elite player to watch. They had to then, do some work on that elite player. Why was they elite? What was their super strength in the toolbox? and then what could they possibly add to their game. Then we had a Champions League task, which was where we had a situation where in between the first and second leg, they had to be like managers and they had to work out what their game plan was going to be, what their team selection was going to be, and then more importantly, why. Just to, try and give them a challenge that maybe they wouldn't necessarily get in normal circumstances. And then that built into their end of season review, which we've just finished last week. And then physically, so we have a platform called Team Builder. So the S&C coaches will post their programs online. They can access it, running, cycling, yoga when they can. And then there was also some workshops from the psych-social team, around, again, that off-pitch element that ultimately will help them when they're on the pitch. So developing themselves in different areas. So, so we had some boys that are in further education. Next week, we've got an online coaching course. So quite varied in nature in terms of the content. And that's it.
It's great.
Absolutely fantastic one. I've written down loads of pages of information. Adam, I think someone asked a question.
Yeah. So just wanted to kind of address some of the questions, and feel free if you've got some others, I'm sure. So Garry was asking about what a typical session looks like with the 23s, obviously, before COVID, and what percentage of coaching do you utilize mental training, and what does that look like? And how would you apply that to your sessions?
Good question. So first off, like I said to you before, it varies in nature in terms of the numbers that we have. So we base a lot of our sessions on who we've got. So if you can imagine, we have to sort of spin plates. So sometimes we'll have big numbers where we'll look at, doing something around the team element, and then also individuals within the team. So we might look at sort of some of the things that we go after are, when we're going to build up, looking to play away the number 9, or to progress the ball through the thirds, we might have to overload in our back line to get an overload to work the ball forwards. When we're in that middle third, we try and go forward as often as possible. If that's not on, we'll then look to switch out to the opposite side. And then certainly something that we've paid a lot of attention to this year is when we look at, getting into the final third and finishing, is getting runs beyond the back line, specifically sort of the corner of the box, because we felt that run gives the opposition a problem. So if you choose to go and track the run, you're opening up space in front of the box. If you keep the line high, then we can maybe find the runner. So you're really giving the opposition back line, whether that's a back 3, back 4, back 5, you're giving them you're almost asking probing questions on, are you gonna be brave and hold that line on the 18, or are you gonna drop? So our sessions will always look at that, certainly in terms of from an offensive perspective. From an out of possession perspective, we're looking for, a reaction on a turnover, and also as well, which we're happy with the progression this year. So, we're a possession team and we try to dominate, but when we have been in dominant areas in the final third, really looking at focusing in on, how we can make sure that the opposition don't get out. So locking the highest player of the opposition, one in front, one behind. And then, that then asks questions of, any clearances that come out of the box, how you can quickly control the ball and then get playing again. Because if you do that really well, the data suggests that you can sustain your attack and you can put the opposition under a lot of pressure. So if we've got big numbers, we'll work on that. If it's a smaller number, which sometimes is okay, you can get even more individual specific work done. So for instance, as an example, you might have, if you've got, say, an attacker and a defender, you can do a lot of position specific work. So we've done stuff. For an example, we've got a number 9 who needs to improve his hold-up play. First ball will go into him under pressure. He's got to hold the ball up, and then we'll go and play live from that. And then if we've got defenders and they need to work on their defending and maybe their tracking, we'll play them off against each other. So you just have to be quite creative, and that's where the planning element is really important, because I go back to you've got to have an impact on every individual that's within that session. So once you roughly know who you've got and what your numbers are, you can work accordingly. There's a big element of knowing where that player is at on the journey. So you've got to be mindful of the physical element as well. So as you can imagine, with boys at the age of 18, 19, 20, some of them are in what I call their adult body, and some of them aren't. So you've got to be mindful of that, the intensity, the stage of the week they're in, the stage of their development. And we use a lot of video as well with our group. So we're fortunate that some of our all of our sessions can be taped. So we'll often, after lunch, we'll go and review it as staff, and we'll try and feed back to the players as often as possible. If not the next morning. I think the second part of the question, correct me if I'm wrong, it was how we work on the mental side. Was that correct?
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
So we're fortunate. We've got a full-time head of psychology and personal development for the academy. And so that program really has got 2 strands, which is one is on the pitch and one is off the pitch. And, equal effort is put into both strands, which I think is important, because like I said, you can't assume that just by working on someone in that, that site corner, that social corner, that it's just football. It's got to be on and off the pitch. And I think that, the big development that gives you, certainly when you're working with teams, individuals, units, is them understanding themselves. How are they going to regulate day to day in what is quite a challenging environment? How are they going to regulate under pressure, maybe in a game or even training for that matter? And there's going to be an element of helping them understand themselves and how they work, and also as well, maybe understanding, what, I can work on myself in this area to be better, to develop myself. So very individual. Certainly, I think the psychological aspect has to be individual because everyone's different. But I do think that there needs to be an understanding of, that cultural and environmental piece with psychology, because you have to be respectful as a coach or a practitioner that we don't always know what's going on, and we have to be mindful of, the what are they like at breakfast, of how do they say good morning, are they okay? Are they not okay? You've got to just try and observe a lot of stuff. And again, I go back to the relationship element of it, which I think is huge. It really is. Because you're never fully going to understand what you're seeing from the psych social corner. So you have to try and build a relationship, build trust. I think that you have to have an element of trust. I think is the biggest thing as a coach. I think you've got to earn the right to coach someone. I don't think you can just assume, oh yeah, I'm just going to coach someone, the X's and O's. I think there's a big element of relationship and connection.
Yeah, that's
just lean on you touched a little bit there about the individual player development plans. For coaches, again, that are listening here, and certainly considering how that may look for them moving forward, how do you structure that? Because obviously when I was there with you, we kind of had 3 plans for each player, and that may have been like a weakness and 2 strengths, or 2 weaknesses and 1 strength. How does that, what's your opinion on that, and what's the kind of Arsenal philosophy around that?
Yeah, so it's a good one. So I think that, every player has an individual development plan, and that plan can look very different. So there are some consistencies and there are some differences. I think that, that's not always going to look like that's always on pitch. So as an example, I referenced the player who I said about the striker with the hold-up play. What we've done a lot of this year is, and it's really, this is actually an interesting case study. So this player was not overperformed. He performed very well last year in the under-18s, scored a lot of goals, a hell of a lot of goals. So objectively, you look and go, wow, how well is he doing? But what we noticed was in pre-season, his hold-up play wasn't at the level that it could be, and it wasn't at the level that it would need to be if he was to, hopefully go across to the first team and stay over there. So what we do is that if I sort of give you an example of how we work, at the end of pre-season, there's been 6 weeks as a staff. There's a screening that's done early in pre-season. So everyone meets as a staff and we discuss the player in the middle. So everyone inputs, and a development plan is, from the staff's perspective, is created. It's all well and good the staff having that plan. You have to share that with the player. So there'll be a conversation with the player. There'll be video clips. There'll be some testing squad show. And really, it's from that conversation that the development plan in the under-23s forms. So with Flo, we looked at Flo. So he said himself he needed to improve his hold-up play. So we was looking at a few things. We was looking at watching video. Was it when it was pressure from behind? Was it pressure from the side? Was it a certain type of service that was causing him problems? It wasn't. It was a general hold-up play issue. So then we went, okay, what we need to do is we need to, overload him technically, but also we need to make sure that with every potential restart in training, can we put him under pressure? So if it was a small-sided game, there'll be times where the ball would go in long. Sometimes it would go in from the goalkeeper. Sometimes it would be a serving member of staff from the side. It would go in and we'll play live from his first touch. So he's under a bit of pressure technically, socially as well, because you imagine if you're on his team and he loses the ball, he's under pressure now. He needs to have a good touch. So we would just constantly look to improve him in his hold-up play. And then, you then go and see if you can see a development. But at the same time, you need to then give him some reinforcement. So showing him good examples, ask him maybe, we want to go and select some clips, come back in and we'll have a look at it after, I don't know, say 3 or 4 games. What are the consistencies? And then involve him in the process. Because I think that when they realise what you're doing and why, and because they're originally part of that conversation, it's more powerful. So that's an example of our, development for that player in that area. And, he has improved. He's still got more to improve, but it has moved on. And it's been noted as well from the first team staff, which is good, because that's what you're looking to do. You're looking to help the individual for the first team staff.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ryan. Thanks for your time. Excellent.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Just one real quick question, probably to finish off. It's a good one. So what's the future? Kieran is asking, what's the future ambitions for yourself? Where are you going to go?
Listen, I think that certainly, I believe I've been really, really fortunate on my coaching journey. There's been some great learning moments. And, the future, I hope there's just as many learning moments. I believe that you've got to seek out opportunities of future learning if you want to improve. And that doesn't just mean in football, that means as a human. So, I hope that one day I'll be able to coach at the highest level possible. That's certainly what I would say is my aspiration now as a coach. I'm very aware that there's lots to learn because I don't think you can ever get to a certain level. I think there's always, much you can learn. But that's my target as a coach, for sure, to work at the highest level possible.
That's great. Brilliant. Well, really appreciate your time and thanks to everybody who was able to jump on today. So Lots of great nuggets of information that they can definitely take away, and hopefully we'll be all back on the pitch here very, very soon. I know we've started slowly. Maybe the English Premier League will be back in a few weeks. We got our fill of Bundesliga this past weekend, so that was nice. But we'll hopefully be back. So thanks again, everybody, and feel free to pop us a note. We'll put this recording up for you so you can check it out. All right, take care, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.